Today, we asked a couple of our state's leaders to come discuss the legislative session. And obviously, the budget is going to be one of the key issues that we're facing. And I can't think of two better people to discuss that issue, as well as the other issues that will be important, than our two speakers. We flipped a coin, drew straws, and we decided on the speaker's order, so there's no specific order, but I'm going to give you both introductions, and we'll start off with Senator Hill. Representative Jerry Keene lives on St. Simon's Island and represents the 179th House District in Glenn County. He just completed his fourth term, and he is running for his fifth term. In 2004, he was unanimously elected by the Republican caucus to be Majority Leader, a position that he holds today. Senator Jack Hill lives in Reedsville and represents the 4th Senatorial District that includes the counties of Bullock, Candler, Effingham, Emmanuel, Evans, Tattnall, and Treutlen counties. And we apologize, Senator Hill, we got that a little bit wrong on our invitation. We were looking at the old maps, so we got it right this time. He currently chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee. He served for 33 years in the Georgia National Guard, and he is an independent grocer. And I think the important thing to remember about our two speakers today, they're both business people. They know what it takes to balance a budget, make the tough decisions that you have to make to meet a payroll. And they both understand job creation and the kind of environment that we need to create in our state to create jobs so we can be one of the states that rebound from this recession the fastest way possible. So with no further ado, please welcome Senator Jack Hill.
Thank you very much, Kelly. It's great to be with you today. And we were just reminiscing when Senator Perdue and I shared an office in the back, the very back hall of the Legislative Office Building, where we had a beautiful view of a brick wall through the only window in the office. We used to, Trip Martin used to gather us up and bring us to your meetings a long, long time ago. I guess that was almost 20 years ago. And so I followed the work of this foundation for a long time and certainly admire the work and you know, you kind of help keep us on the true path. I also want to tell you what a pleasure it is to be here with Jerry Keene. Jerry's been a great friend over the years, and you know, one of those folks. I think he is probably the premier strategic thinker that we've got in the legislature in Georgia. And Jerry, I'm honored to be here with you on this podium today. We were talking earlier with somebody, and we were thinking about some of the good things to be thankful for given the holiday, and we're saying, well, you know, the good news is we're not California, and we're not, you know, we're not a Rust Belt state sliding into oblivion, and we've actually had a good year in economic development. There are actually lots of positives going on, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today. But things are in the intermediate and long term. I don't know of anybody that I know who's concerned about our state from a long-term perspective. I know that I'm not. And, you know, you don't have to go around the state very far to find some really bright spots. So we're going to be fine. We do, however, have some challenges and some speed bumps, as they say. And don't worry about it. If you can't see this chart, don't worry too much about it. All that really is there for is for sort of a trend, and I'll talk you through it. It's not anything you got to read, or there's no test afterwards. But I will just tell you this: remembering the setting that we live in, and Georgia, by our Constitution, has to balance its budget every year. And I'm not here to slam the federal government. Frankly, we couldn't have lived without those stimulus funds. But the truth is, we do have to balance our budget every year, and that drives our thinking in a state that I think was conservative under the Democrats and has been just as conservative under the Republican leadership of this state. And that's why I'm pretty confident about the steps that we've got to take this year. While they're pretty daunting, I believe that we'll continue to make those decisions in the right way, and that this state will continue to progress because of good leadership from the bodies. But here's some of the challenges that we face. And as I said, don't worry about looking at the chart. Let me just frame it a little bit by saying 2 years ago this January, the governor presented the 2009 budget. It's about $20.45 billion as the budget he presented to the legislature. Today, the budget we're operating under in state funds, the amount that we're going to raise from state revenues and tax revenues, is under 16 billion. So that is a tremendous drop. And this chart just very simply shows you the last 3 years. And this is year before last, the 2008 budget, and you can just see it sliding down. Somewhere right in here, Jerry Keene, I said, this trend doesn't look too good. And Jerry Keene, he's going to say it later, but he accused me of being the Vince Dooley of budgeting by seeing something bad in every month's revenues. So every month right along here, I said, this trend doesn't look good. And they said, well, you can't tell anything by 1 month. So by the end of that year, though, we slid into negative territory. And as you look at this other side of the chart, when I talk a little bit about how we're making up the difference and how we're making up the shortfall, we actually used $600 million, our reserve, year before last. And that, of course, took that reserve we had that was so robust, began to decrease at that time. This chart is month over month, and zero is right here somewhere. And you can see we had a year where we were above zero and then slid into negative territory here. The year that ended this past June, the 09 year, you can see it kind of had a little hump right here. These are the 3 months we're competing with right now over last year, and that's why we're still continuing to suffer, because as you can see later on, these last 6-8 months of this past fiscal year, we just had a precipitous drop. In fact, frankly, I hadn't really run any numbers on the Great Depression and maybe some things you can't compare, but I guarantee you it's been a long time since we've seen a slide like that in the last 6 months. And, nobody saw it coming. There are probably a few economists in the room, but I'll just tell you, whoever said if they laid all the economists in the world end to end, it'd be a good idea, well, I'm there. I tell you, we nobody saw it coming, and maybe nobody saw, the credit collapse. I mean, maybe nobody ever said that. In fact, I remember saying about right here last year, in June or July, August, when we were really concerned, I said, well, I just can't imagine our state not being able to take in $17 billion. That's just incredible for me to believe that. Well, we're taking in less than 16 now, so that just tells you you really can't go by what you believe. And trends don't always show everything you want to see. The sad news, we wound up minus 14% or so for the year. That's over the year before. These are month to month, and they're cumulative, so you can actually see the trend. This year, of course, we're sitting here over 15% down over this year last year. So we're struggling, and what we've basically done, we're like a home. We're to some degree like a home where we've lost one of our incomes, and yet we're still spending at a higher level because we just haven't reduced our spending enough. And that's one of the problems that we face is we have used the piggy bank and the money under the mattress to meet that shortfall. And the problem, of course, with one-time funds is they're one time. And I want to flip this chart over, and I'll just talk a second about that. So don't worry about it if you can't read it. The trend is all I really want to point out to you. And those of you who visited my office asking for money, you've seen all this before. So. The only thing we haven't put up is a no whining sticker or anything. But what we've done, and you got two shades of green here. Everything above that is one-time funds. This is the 09 budget, I think, 09. This is 10. This is 11. This is 12. You want to worry about something, worry about 12. We've got no one-time funds, no stimulus funds, no nothing. We're on our own in 12. Dark green is cumulative cuts. And the thing you got to remember about budget cuts, and all this is kind of new to us because, frankly, you remember those days when you started with what you had last year and all you were looking for was new money for this year? Well, that's the way we did budgets. In fact, interestingly, just as an aside, Governor Perdue's been in office 7 years. 4 out of the 7, and this will be a negative year too, 5 out of the 8 years he will have been in office, we've had negative revenue growth. That is just incredible. But those 3 years, though, we had growth. I remember saying, you flip through that budget, or flip through the tracking document, and there was $1 billion in new money in that budget, and you couldn't find it. I mean, it was just government. It was unemployment insurance. It was GBA rents. And who knows what black hole that is. But, I mean, it was just, money going places, and you really couldn't see any benefit for the taxpayers from it. Well, we've certainly turned that corner, and we've headed back in the other direction. But it does make you realize that when you're going down, every cut you make, everything you do this year, you start out the next year with the assumption that you've got to make every one of those same cuts again. And what we've faced, of course, is every time we've looked around, every quarter, instead of meeting whatever projections we've had, we've gone down. We've been minus of those projections at every turn, every corner. And this past year, we had Governor adjusted the revenue estimate last year, 5 times or so. I mean, it's just been incredible as we've had to adjust our revenue. But the thing as going forward, the thing we've done, of course, is to use one-time funds, either one-time reserves. You can see here in the orange where we use one-time funds. The blue are stimulus funds. We had about $3.5 billion in stimulus funds, and I know it's popular for all of us to slam the federal government, but I'll be honest with you. Without those stimulus funds, I don't know what we would have done. I mean, that was actually like a blessing and a prayer answered. We divided those $3.5 billion, and I've got about $1.4 billion in this 10 budget we're in right now, and then in 11 we've got about $1 billion left. As you can see, the trend, as I said, everything above green is one-time funds. As those funds go away, the one-time funds we've found, they go away. The RSR, the reserve fund, we basically used that up. We've got a couple of $100 million left, about 100 in really pure reserves when you take away the education mid-year education reserve. But those funds, as of this year, will be gone, down to just a smattering. And then, of course, the last year of the stimulus fund. So when that's gone, we're all in 12. Then we're on our own, and as you can tell, the cuts right here in the green, these are new cuts in the light green. This 11 budget we're going to have to pass is going to have about $1 billion in additional cuts. And that is going to really define, I believe, what people believe or what the legislature and the governor believe are essential services in our state, because you're going to see some pretty painful decisions. Now, having said all of that, what can detract from this will be growth. And there are some folks who believe we may start growing this coming year, but I will just tell you this: to make up that $1 billion, we would have to grow at a 6% rate. Anybody remember growing at 6%? It's been a long time. So those odds are pretty slim. That's pretty much, I think, everything I really came to say, is just to say that we're going to continue to work with departments. I'll say this: the governor presented a $900 million shortfall that we're in. We believe we're about $1.3 billion short in the 010 budget we're in right now. That's the year we're in right now. Governor presented a program to cut $900 million back in July, which included the furloughs for teachers and mandatory furloughs for state employees, which extended it to about one per month for a lot of agencies. We're probably going to have to cut another $300 million or so in this budget we're in right now. That's just amended. And then whatever that is, we'll have to carry it forward in the 11 budget as well. So we're really going to have to struggle to make that happen. Hopefully, we will start growing again over the next year. But it's just hard to imagine, given the trend on that. You remember the trend we had, and what's happened is these months have just followed that trend we had at the last part of last year. So we'll just hold that thought, and Jerry's going to come now and tell you how we're going to solve some of these problems. It's my pleasure to be here with you, and I hope we can continue to all work together. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jack, and thanks to Kelly and Rogers and all for inviting me. Jack and I have developed a great friendship over the years, like you said. I'll tell you this: Jack he carries this little yellow pad around with him all the time, and this day of all the computer stuff we have and the ability to look at a budget document that thick on the computer, Jack's always writing on that pad, and it scares me to death when we're in conference committee. I never know what he's writing, but I'll tell you this: one of my favorite pictures that I have in my office is Jack and I sitting over in the windowsill, which is sort of my on-the-floor office during a budget conference committee where we were really at a stalemate. And the real difficult process of getting a balanced budget done through two legislative chambers is that you have 180 House members and 56 senators, all that have different priorities and needs and wants and desires in that budget, and trying to find consensus along with the executive branch is not as easy as it would appear at times. And I think Jack and I sat down off that yellow pad and in about 10 minutes worked out and got it resolved, and we were able to go in and get the budget passed. But he's a gentleman, he's a man of his word, and he's an individual that I enjoy working with. Jack laid out sort of our budget. I mean, I will tell you that this is not new to any state. Every state, except for those that have oil wells, are facing the exact same thing that we are. Now, the opportunity for us during this recession is to really redefine the role of state government, and I think it will also redefine the role of local governments. The good old days are not coming back anytime soon. Yes, we're going to see growth again. Yes, we're going to see revenue grow. Yes, we're going to see jobs created, but not at robust rates that all of a sudden next year or the year after we're back to the revenues that we saw 3 and 4 years ago. So with that in mind, we're going to have to decide who and what we're going to be at state government. Recognize those core services that we should deliver to the citizens, and other things that we cannot deliver, even though they may be good, we're simply not going to be able to do. One solution to our problem, I believe, and I believe the House believes, and I think the Senate is there with us now, is we can no longer solve this problem with across-the-board cuts. You continue to cut and cut and cut equally across the line. What you do is you render the entire organization ineffective. I think we've got to go back, look at our total revenues, identify our priorities, fund those revenues so that they can be functional and competent. And if there's no money left over for the other priorities, that's just the way it's got to be. And I think that is going to be the new role of state government. I've participated in several national meetings this summer and fall, and I'm hearing that exact same message from state leaders in red states, blue states, north, south, east, west. We're all in this together, and I think the message is redefining who we are as a state and those services and funding those. But we have other challenges as well. Populations continue to grow. As Jack said, revenues are down back to where they were several years ago, but we have 1.2 million more people to serve today than we did at the high point of that revenue chart. That's a dramatic change. That's new students in our schools. That's new people on our highways. Not all those new citizens are law-abiding, and that means new people in our jails and in our judiciary to service. And that puts a tremendous amount of pressure, which takes me back to what I just said about identifying our priorities. But a couple of other items that I want to mention, and I know you've got a great speaker coming next month on transportation. But we've been dealing with that issue, I think, at the legislature since I've been there. But we really do have a real challenge to continue to build an infrastructure that's critical to allow Georgia to experience that job growth we need. Without an effective, modernized transportation system, we will not be able to continue to attract jobs and new growth in the state. And that's not just the metro area. Down on the coast where I'm from, we have the ports in Savannah and Brunswick that are really an economic engine for this state that a lot of people, particularly the metro area, don't realize the importance of what that does to our state economy, having those ports effective, and the ability to have effective transportation corridors out of those ports and into those ports to move the cargo along. I think what we have consensus on today as I stand before you is a twofold measure to address transportation funding, which is below where it was 10 years ago on a per capita basis. Number one, the Metro has a unique situation. Metro Atlanta has a unique situation. If you talk about transportation in Atlanta, it really means one thing, and that's congestion and the inability to get from point A to point B in a reasonable amount of time. Down in the rural area of the state, transportation may mean just paving roads, just the ability to pave roads or widen a road to allow for traffic to move through. So in the metro area, we've been working with the Senate leadership, our transportation chairman, and others to develop a plan that we'll bring to vote, a common bill that we'll bring to vote in both chambers. I couldn't tell you what will happen to it, but we're going to put it out there, that will give the metro counties the ability, should they so choose, to come up with, for lack of a better term, a T-SPLOS, but a list of projects they can take to their voters. If the voters approve it, then they'll be able to assess a penny tax that will go toward those projects and improve the infrastructure in those counties if they can agree county by county. That's a necessary step. Our metropolitan Atlanta area deserves that, and we're working hard to work out the details. Now, the larger problem is the statewide funding. How are we going to continue to fund transportation? Our revenues are down, as you know, because the price of the commodity is down. When you have a sales tax tied to the price of the commodity, sales tax revenue generated from motor fuels tax is somewhat down, although the per gallon, the flat tax, is up, which means people are driving more because gas is down a little bit. We're going to need to look at that, but on a statewide basis, we've been working on an idea and a concept, and we met with our DOT commissioner, we met with the Greta commissioner to talk about this past week, a plan that we believe will allow us going forward to capture additional revenues targeted for transportation without increasing or creating any new revenue sources. Translated, that means no new taxes. And we believe we've identified a way to do that in years where revenue growth exceeds a certain point, and be able to say this is one of the highest priorities of this General Assembly, is to make sure that in years when we have these revenue growth and we have the ability to fund it, we can target that money first into transportation and long-term projects. Those are two difficult concepts to get consensus on, but our commitment on both the House and the Senate leadership is to bring those measures to a vote during this year's session, and hopefully the members will vote positively and give the voters a chance to speak their voice later this year. There are other challenges as we lead into this session. We could talk about so many of the things that we've talked about, trauma care. Let me just mention one that I think may be of interest to those of you gathered here today. One of the first things we did as a Republican majority 5-6 years ago now was we passed one of the most comprehensive and I believe friendly tort reform laws in this country. We recognized that this state the pendulum had swung a little far to the left on that. We were experiencing loss of physicians. Down in my area of the state, we were losing physicians in record numbers who were simply leaving the state because of the tort climate, and more practically, their med-mal insurance premiums had risen to the point where they could no longer afford to be in business. Businesses where they were looking to locate in Georgia, one of their issues was the tort climate, and we went in and in a very difficult debate, spirited debate, we were able to pass what I consider a model tort reform bill that has allowed us to continue to attract new jobs. And on the medical side, let me tell you this. We have record growth of new physicians wanting to come to the state. Medical malpractice premiums have dropped in record amounts. They're below where they were years ago, not even trending for inflation and the cost of services. And at a time when we passed that bill, we had one carrier offering the product in the state. We now have 7. For those of us that are free market and believe in the power of competition, it's working. 3 of the components of that bill are now being challenged at the Georgia State Supreme Court. I don't know how that court's going to rule. I tell people all the time I'm a member of the legislative branch. I have no idea what the judicial branch will do. But if the court vacates any or all of those, I believe as a General Assembly this session we'll have to react quickly to address and reinstate the major components of that bill. It has served us well, and if we do not have reasonable tort limits in place, the road to recovery economically will be more difficult and harder, and certainly access to health care, particularly in our rural areas, will be affected. So that's something that's a little off the radar. Keep an eye on that. We're prepared to act depending on what the court may say. With that in mind, I'll close with this, and then Jack, I think they want us to answer some questions. I didn't bring any charts or overheads or laser pointers. It's high tech. I'll just say this. We have, sometime in crisis, you bring people together. And we do have an economic crisis facing our state and our nation. And not since I've been in a position of leadership have I seen the cooperation and the commitment on both the House, the Senate, and the executive branch to work together to identify the funding priorities in this budget cycle for the state. It is, in fact, the only constitutionally mandated function that we have as elected representatives and senators. All the other bills we pass, we do because we can. The budget is what we should do. It's our highest priority. I tell my caucus members all the time, we make more policy in the budget each year than we do in all the other bills that we pass, because that's where the funding and that's where you drive the policy in the state. And there's a great commitment to continue to work with our friends across the hall and the other chamber to bring to Georgia a balanced, reasonable, and meaningful budget for the next fiscal year. And with that, Kelly, you want us? If there are questions, we'll come on, Jack. Don't leave me hanging, dude. Any questions?
I'll start off with one. We've heard a lot about zero-based budgeting. How you heard you say that we need to look at everything, not just the increases, because there aren't any increases in revenues. How does zero-based budgeting fit in with our project-based budgeting that we're doing now?
We all can hear that question, but he asked about zero-based budgeting, and we've actually passed legislation that's never completed the cycle and finished both houses yet. But the idea, of course, is that you build a budget from the ground up, and then every 4 years you basically go back and examine the code, examine everything a department or agency is doing, and try to decide, is that their central core mission? I think in answer to your question, Kelly, is that the difference is today we're using this crisis, and whoever said the other day, never waste a good crisis. I think what we're doing is we're forcing departments and agencies to identify their core missions and then to work from the outside in. And so we're doing that through budget cuts as well. I'd have to tell you the Corrections Department is a pretty good example of an agency that developed a strategic plan, identified their core mission, and then has been working, as the budget cuts required, has been working towards the center. We still believe in zero-based budgeting, and of course the program budgeting process that we use really breaks that budget down into programmatic level, which makes us all look at what an agency is doing and try to measure the results of how they're doing it. So I think there's still a place for zero-based budgeting, but we're actually getting there by a different route.
Yeah, only thing I would add to that is that as revenue growth returns, and it will, you want to be able to go back and backfill some of the things that you need to do. And I think the House and the Senate, and along certainly with Governor Perdue, have done a good job in managing the growth of that budget and making sure that we've not allocated dollars where they're not needed or creating a lot of new programs. And I think the interest of the members of the General Assembly in passing that is that we don't know who may be there in years down the road, and when the good times return, we want to make sure that budget is managed the way we budgeted. So there's a good likelihood that bill will get some action this year. Rick?
Many years ago, in the budget process, when they were changing the current year's budget, the terms supplemental and amended budget had some meaning. Or is that just passe now in terms of whether you're adding money or whether adding and subtracting? Will those terms still used?
Well, the midterm, amended, little budget, whatever you want to call it, is still a vital part of the budgeting component. Number one, your midterm adjustments to education and other things are affected there. This particular year, the allocation reductions that the governor ordered the agencies must be confirmed by the legislature. They're only, the quote-unquote cuts are only allocation reductions. The office of the governor has constitutional authority to withhold allocations during the first 6 months of the fiscal year. But that has to be confirmed by the General Assembly through a midterm budget, or that money is going to have to be allocated. So it carries a very significant role. I think one of the great things we've done is redefine what we do in the midterm budget. You know, prior to our ability to govern, midterm budget was used for a lot of different things. And we've sort of changed that process and used it really for just adjusting the major budget that was passed originally and not creating a new budget halfway through.
I would just only add to that, and Jerry's exactly right. Our philosophy has been that the way to really start out by budgeting is do a full year budget and let everything compete for those dollars in the beginning. We'd gotten into a habit, I think, over the years when you had new revenue of undershooting the general budget then waiting around, and we all know that, waiting around to the amended budget and get your projects in the amended budget while nobody's really paying attention. I think the way to run the government right is to have everybody compete on the same ground at the beginning of the year for a full year budget, and as Jerry says, use your amended budget to correct mistakes or to correct things that are new, things that have just occurred, but not to plan whole new programs in a period of a year where you don't have anything to compare it to.
Senator?
After the final number shakes out on the current budget we're in, after we do the supplemental, what percentage of our budget, of our state spending, do you feel will be going through to higher education and K through 12?
Yeah, it's probably 51, 52.
Everything together is 56, 57%. It breaks down like this, and it's interestingly because we haven't cut K-12 education as much as we've cut the entire budget. As most of you know, we've only cut K-12 education 3% when we're cutting everybody else 5 to 10%. Now the K-12 portion is up to almost 43% of the state budget. In fact, a number that really jumps out at you Ralph, when you compare teacher salaries, which is 80% of that 42%, when you calculate it out, teacher salaries are 1/3 of the entire state budget. I mean, that's the sobering number that you see. That's why when you start cutting a budget, you can't go far without looking at teacher salaries and all state salaries as well. But the higher ed portion is about 14%, so you can add them both together, you got somewhere about 56, 57%, which is actually in the top 10 in the country in the percentage of state budget allocated to education.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Majority Leader, I'm Ann Mintz. I'm with United Way. I was trying not to ask any questions, but I just couldn't help myself. You were talking about zero-based budgeting, and you were using Department of Corrections as an example of an organization that had defined its mission to be able to budget from its core outward. My question is, those agencies can't necessarily contemplate spillover effects that are not part of their core mission, but that are nevertheless affecting the community. And let me explain. When Department of Corrections has to cut back on their reentry programs, that affects us here in the metro area and the rest of the state, because we know that a lot of those folks that are being discharged end up homeless. The recidivism rate is very high unless those people are reintegrated quickly into the community. So, where is that level of oversight in the zero-based budgeting?
Well, the zero-based budgeting is not in itself to address that. Zero-based budgeting is to bring real numbers back into the process. What happens is, in the appropriations process, Agency A gets $1,000 this year, next year it's $1,200, next year it's $1,400, and then 4 years from now, all of a sudden their budget is doubled or close to it, and it's to bring some, rather than budgeting off the revenue, is to go back and budget off necessity and priorities. And I think that's what the Senator and I have said, and I think that's what we're doing today. I know our budget office, the Senate Budget Office, and OPB are looking at every line in that budget, trying to decide what's needed, what's necessary, and where can we put the money. But remember this, there is a finite amount of money. We cannot print money here in Atlanta nor borrow it from the Chinese to operate on. So we have a limited amount of money to manage the state with. And it's in a balanced budget cycle, there are always going to be those things, while good, you're just not going to be able to get to. And I'm sure that'll be the case this budget cycle. It's not going to be something where everybody's going to look at the budget and say, gee whiz. And Jack hears the same thing I hear, and just pretty much everybody involved in the budget process hears from every group or individual comes in the office. I understand the budget crisis, but not me. It's okay, take Kelly's, but not me. And so I'll tell you how I answer it generally. If they need $3 million, $4 million, $5 million, I say, all right, go back out in the hallway, find the $5 million. Because if I give you that $5 million, it has to come from somewhere else in a balanced budget. So you go find the $5 million, get them to sign off on it, y'all come in here, and I'll take it to the appropriations process and get it done. I hadn't had anybody come back, but I think that's the problem, or that's the process we have to deal through, and at the same time be sensitive to the needs of our citizens. Yes, sir.
You commented on most states being the same situation, a few better than others, and certainly some worse. But as you've talked with peers from other states, and just individually, have you seen any or heard of any ideas that you think are particularly creative or effective in other states that you'd like to try?
I've heard some we're not going to try. I don't believe at a time when you need to grow new jobs, allow families to survive, increase spending, which helps our economy, you do anyone any favors by raising taxes. It's the wrong time to do that. And we are, I know the Lieutenant Governor said that, the Speaker said it, everyone, we are not going to raise taxes to try to solve this problem. Other states have. And I think there'll be a long-term consequence to that. Sometimes it sounds good. It's politically expedient to say, boy, look at this money we can generate in the short term. What you harm yourself in the long term is new job growth and sustainable job growth. And I want Georgia to be known as that state that's open for business and welcomes new business, and that people want to move here because we're a low-tax state. And that's how we became a fast-growing state. That's why we're in better shape than most. And I'm sure the Senator agrees with me. We're not going to raise taxes to get us out of this problem.
The only thing I'd add to that is when you compare Georgia to other states, I think what maybe you're referring to, is a couple of things that do jump out at you. Georgia ranks 42nd in the country in tuition, and of the low tax states, we tend to be at a little bit higher tax rate than the low tax states, than some of the other low tax states, and it appears to be because our fee revenue is less than our peers in that group, and of course tuition as well. So, you know, if there's anything to be looked at, maybe those are areas that somebody ought to be taking a look at as well. But I certainly agree with Jerry. You know, people all walk up to me all the time and say, you ought to put the sales tax back on food. Well, that's $600 million you just took out of working people's pockets who were going to buy food with it next month. I don't know why you would take that money and send it to Atlanta and then let us play with it, because I don't think they get their money back that way.
Does Rick get a second one?
Yeah, I have a second. Short. Based on what you've gone through with the market and the economy, can you comment on what the status is of our teachers' retirement system and our state employees' retirement system in terms of their...
You mean the financial viability of the system? Sure. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, they're in great shape. In fact, if you go back and read the prospectus on our bond issue recently, the first thing that the bond underwriters mentioned in assessing Georgia's viability and stability is the stability and well-funded state of our retirement systems. They're both way above the well-funded capacity, and I mean that's due, I think, in large part to the legislature and the executive branch both being very protective of passing new benefits without the corresponding funds. So one of the things we don't have to worry about, unlike Illinois and some other states, we don't have to worry about, not that we don't have to continue to put funds in our retirement system, but they're all three well funded, not to worry about them.
I don't know if you saw in the morning news this morning, Rick, but there's a state, and I can't recall it. Actually watched the news the last day or so, but a state that is raising a tuition tax to try to fund the unfunded levels of their pension plan, or underfunded of their state employees' pension plan. And Jack's right. It's been very conservatively managed, and that's held us in good stead. I think we're getting the hook. Thank you so much for allowing us to be here, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks.